Italy, the cradle of the Renaissance. Italy is widely recognized as the cradle of the Renaissance, a period of significant cultural, intellectual, and artistic development that began in the late 14th century and extended into the 17th century. The term Renaissance, meaning rebirth, reflects the revival of interest in the knowledge, philosophies, and artistic achievements of ancient Greece and Rome. This period emerged gradually in Italy due to a combination of political, economic, social, and geographic factors. Italy's central location in the Mediterranean allowed it to serve as a hub for trade, communication, and the exchange of ideas. The independent city-states of Italy, such as Florence, Venice, Milan, and Rome, each played a role in supporting and fostering the conditions necessary for cultural advancement. Florence, in particular, is often regarded as the birthplace of the Renaissance due to its concentration of wealth, influential families, and patronage of the arts. The Medici family of Florence, through their political influence and financial resources, supported artists, architects, and scholars, enabling significant achievements in various fields. Humanism, a central intellectual movement of the Renaissance, emphasized the value of human potential and the study of classical texts. Italian scholars, such as Petrarch and later Erasmus, contributed to the rediscovery and analysis of ancient manuscripts, which encouraged further developments in literature, philosophy, and historical research. In the visual arts, Italian Renaissance artists made significant advances in realism, perspective, and technique. Figures such as Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Raphael, and Donatello produced works that reflected detailed study of anatomy, proportion, and space. Their achievements were supported by technical innovations such as linear perspective and improved methods of using light and shadow. These artists, often commissioned by wealthy patrons or religious institutions, contributed to the construction of churches, palaces, and public works that displayed the growing emphasis on harmony, balance, and classical forms. Architecture during the Renaissance in Italy also reflected a renewed interest in ancient Roman structures. Architects like Filippo Brunelleschi and Leon Battista Alberti designed buildings that incorporated columns, domes, and arches, combining functionality with classical aesthetics. The dome of Florence Cathedral, designed by Brunelleschi, remains a significant example of engineering skill and architectural ambition from this period. In literature, Italian writers such as Dante Alighieri, Giovanni Boccaccio, and Niccolò Machiavelli produced works that explored human nature, morality, and political theory. Their contributions helped shape modern European thought and literary traditions. The invention of the printing press in the mid-15th century facilitated the spread of Renaissance ideas beyond Italy to other parts of Europe. Scientific inquiry also experienced growth during the Italian Renaissance. Figures like Galileo Galilei made significant contributions to fields such as astronomy, physics, and mathematics. Building upon earlier works and challenging established beliefs, the Renaissance period in Italy was not limited to the arts and sciences, but also included changes in political structures, education, and economic practices. The development of banking and commercial networks supported the growth of wealth that financed artistic and intellectual endeavors. The Catholic Church, despite periods of internal conflict, played a significant role in supporting Renaissance culture through commissions for art, architecture, and scholarly projects. Rome became an important center for Renaissance activity. particularly during the papacy of patrons such as Pope Julius II and Pope Leo X, who commissioned major works like the Sistine Chapel ceiling and St. Peter's Basilica. While the Renaissance brought remarkable achievements, it also reflected social inequalities, with access to education and cultural participation largely limited to the elite. Over time, the ideas and artistic styles of the Italian Renaissance spread to Northern Europe, influencing regions such as France, Germany, and England. By the early 17th century, the Italian Renaissance had gradually given way to other cultural movements, but its legacy continued to shape Western civilization. The period marked a transition from medieval traditions to modernity, emphasizing observation, individual potential, and the study of the natural world. Italy's role as the origin and epicenter of this transformative era remains a central aspect of its historical identity. The contributions made by Italian artists, scholars, and thinkers during the Renaissance continue to be studied and recognized for their lasting impact on art, science, literature, and philosophy across the world. The role of the Catholic Church in everyday life. The Catholic Church played a central role in everyday life throughout much of European history, particularly during the Middle Ages and the early modern period. Its influence extended beyond religious practice and affected nearly all aspects of society, including education, politics, social structure, and economic activity. The Church provided spiritual guidance through regular religious services, sacraments, and teachings which shaped the beliefs and behaviors of the population. Attendance at Mass was a routine obligation for most individuals, with Sundays and religious festivals observed as times for worship and rest. The Church administered the 7 sacraments, which were considered essential to spiritual life and progression. These included baptism, confirmation, the Eucharist, penance, anointing of the sick, holy orders, and marriage. Each sacrament marked an important stage or event in an individual's life and reinforced the Church's presence from birth to death. The Church also served as the primary institution for education, with monasteries, cathedral schools, and later universities providing instruction in literacy, theology, philosophy, and other subjects. Religious orders, such as the Benedictines, Franciscans, and Dominicans, contributed to teaching and preserving knowledge. The Latin language, used by the Church, remained the standard for scholarly and religious communication. The Church exerted significant influence over political affairs. Monarchs, nobles, and rulers often sought the Church's approval to legitimize their authority. The Pope, as the head of the Catholic Church, held considerable spiritual and temporal power, at times intervening in disputes between states or excommunicating rulers who defied church authority. The concept of Christendom reflected the idea of a unified Christian society under the spiritual leadership of the Pope. Church law, known as canon law, regulated many aspects of personal and community life, including marriage, morality, inheritance, and the resolution of disputes. Church courts operated alongside secular courts, often handling cases related to religious matters, clerical misconduct, and moral offences. The Church also played a central role in social welfare. Monasteries, convents, and charitable organizations provided assistance to the poor, the sick, and travelers. Hospitals and hospices, often established by religious orders, offered care to those in need. Religious festivals, processions, and public events organized by the Church provided opportunities for community gathering and reinforced social cohesion. The Church controlled vast land holdings and wealth, collected tithes, and received donations from the faithful. Its economic activities included managing agricultural estates, operating mills, and engaging in trade. Religious institutions were among the largest landowners, particularly in regions where monasticism was widespread. The Catholic Church also shaped artistic and cultural life. Churches and cathedrals were constructed as centers for worship and community life, often decorated with religious art, sculptures, and stained glass. Music, particularly Gregorian chant and later polyphonic compositions, played an important role in liturgical services. The Church sponsored artistic works that depicted biblical scenes, saints, and religious themes. In rural areas, the local parish church served as the focal point of daily life. The parish priest provided spiritual services, conducted ceremonies, and acted as a mediator in local disputes. Religious instruction emphasized adherence to church teachings, confession of sins, and participation in communal worship. Pilgrimage to holy sites, such as Santiago de Compostela, Rome, or Jerusalem, was encouraged as a form of devotion and penance. Religious relics and shrines attracted visitors and contributed to the local economy. The Catholic Church also engaged in efforts to define and enforce orthodoxy. Councils and synods established doctrines and addressed theological disputes. Heresy, defined as deviation from accepted church teachings, was met with suppression through inquisitions and other measures. The Church sought to maintain religious unity and authority over doctrinal matters. Over time, challenges to the Church's authority emerged, including the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century, which led to significant religious, political, and social changes. Despite these developments, the Catholic Church continued to influence daily life, particularly in regions where it remained the dominant religious institution. Its legacy is evident in the structures, traditions, and cultural practices that persist in many parts of the world. The role of the Catholic Church in everyday life reflects its historical position as both a religious and social institution deeply integrated into the fabric of European society. City-states and power struggles. Florence, Venice, and Rome. During the late Middle Ages and the Renaissance period, Italy was divided into numerous city-states, among which Florence, Venice, and Rome emerged as significant centers of political power, economic activity, and cultural development. Unlike the centralized monarchies of France or England, the Italian peninsula consisted of independent states that competed for influence, territory, and resources. This fragmented political structure contributed to recurring power struggles among these states, as well as within them. Florence, located in central Italy, was governed by a republic system dominated by wealthy merchant families, most notably the Medici family. The city's economy was based on banking, finance, and the wool trade, which generated considerable wealth and allowed for patronage of the arts and scholarship. The Medici family gained political influence through financial power, controlling the government while maintaining the appearance of republican institutions. Their leadership contributed to Florence's cultural achievements, but also provoked opposition from rival families and factions, leading to periods of instability and internal conflict. Venice, situated in northeastern Italy, developed as a maritime republic with an economy centered on trade, shipbuilding, and commerce. Its strategic location along the Adriatic Sea allowed Venice to establish extensive trade networks throughout the Mediterranean and beyond. The Venetian government was an oligarchy led by the Doge, elected for life by the city's aristocratic elite. Venice maintained a complex system of checks and balances to prevent any single individual or faction from dominating political life. The city's prosperity depended on control of trade routes, resulting in conflicts with other maritime powers, such as the Ottoman Empire and Genoa. Despite external threats, Venice preserved its independence and economic influence for several centuries. Rome, located in central Italy, held historical significance as the seat of the Catholic Church and the residence of the Pope. During the Renaissance, Rome functioned as both a religious center and a political entity within the Papal States. The Pope exercised spiritual authority over Catholics across Europe, while also acting as a temporal ruler within Italian affairs. The papacy's involvement in political and military conflicts contributed to the complex power dynamics among the city-states. Rome's fortunes fluctuated, depending on the strength and policies of individual popes. Some popes, such as Julius II and Leo X, engaged in ambitious building projects and artistic patronage, while others focused on consolidating territorial control and addressing internal challenges. The rivalry between Florence, Venice, and Rome often extended beyond politics to influence culture, diplomacy, and warfare. Alliances were frequently formed and dissolved based on shifting interests and external pressures from foreign powers such as France, Spain, and the Holy Roman Empire. The Italian Wars, which began in the late 15th century, involved numerous city-states and external forces competing for dominance over Italian territories. These conflicts reflected the vulnerability of the fragmented political landscape and the inability of the Italian states to form a unified front against foreign intervention. Within Florence, political factions competed for control, resulting in events such as the exile of the Medici family and the rise of reformist leaders like Girolamo Savonarola, who temporarily imposed religious restrictions and challenged the prevailing social order. In Venice, the need to balance economic interests with political stability led to the development of secret councils and surveillance systems designed to maintain order and prevent dissent. Rome's position as the center of the Catholic Church brought both prestige and vulnerability, with the city experiencing periods of occupation, such as the sack of Rome in 1527 by imperial forces. The competition among Florence, Venice, and Rome shaped the course of Italian history, influencing economic development, artistic achievements, and the broader political landscape of Europe. Despite their differences, these city-states shared characteristics of wealth accumulation, cultural patronage, and engagement in diplomatic and military affairs. Their power struggles reflected broader themes of ambition, rivalry, and the challenges of maintaining autonomy within a divided region. Over time, the influence of external powers increased, contributing to the gradual decline of the independent city-states and the eventual unification of Italy in the 19th century. The historical legacy of Florence, Venice, and Rome continues to be recognized for their roles in shaping European history and culture. The Medici family, bankers who ruled Florence. The Medici family played a central role in the political, economic, and cultural life of Florence during the Renaissance period. Originating as a banking family, the Medici rose to prominence through the accumulation of wealth and influence, eventually becoming de facto rulers of the city. Their involvement in finance, politics, and patronage of the arts contributed to Florence's development as a major center of commerce, culture, and intellectual advancement. The Medici Bank, established in the late 14th century by Giovanni di Bici de' Medici, became one of the most powerful financial institutions in Europe. The bank expanded its operations across major cities including Rome, Venice, London, and Bruges, facilitating trade, currency exchange, and investment. The Medici family's financial success allowed them to gain political leverage within Florence, where the government was nominally a republic but heavily influenced by wealthy elites. Giovanni di Bicci de' Medici laid the foundation for the family's future power by maintaining a careful balance between business interests and political involvement. His son, Cosimo de' Medici, known as Cosimo the Elder, expanded both the family's wealth and political influence. Through strategic alliances, patronage, and control of key governmental positions, Cosimo effectively guided Florence's governance while preserving the outward appearance of republican institutions. Under Cosimo's leadership, the Medici supported public works, religious institutions, and artistic projects that enhanced their standing among the populace. The Medici family's influence extended beyond banking and politics to the cultural sphere. They were significant patrons of architecture, literature, philosophy, and the visual arts, contributing to the broader Renaissance movement in Italy. The family's support enabled artists and scholars such as Filippo Brunelleschi, Donatello, Sandro Botticelli, and later Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci to produce notable works. The Medici also supported the construction of significant buildings, including churches, palaces, and public spaces that reflected the city's prosperity and artistic development. Despite their contributions to Florence's economic and cultural growth, the Medici's dominance provoked opposition from rival families and political factions. Periods of exile and political conflict marked their rule, as opponents sought to diminish their influence. In 1433, Cosimo de' Medici was briefly exiled due to political tensions, but returned to Florence the following year with increased public support. His return solidified the Medici's control over the city's governance, which continued through subsequent generations. Lorenzo de' Medici, known as Lorenzo the Magnificent, further strengthened the family's position during the second half of the 15th century. Lorenzo maintained the Medici Bank's operations while navigating complex political dynamics within Florence and beyond. His leadership emphasized diplomacy, cultural patronage, and the maintenance of social order. Lorenzo's support for artists, poets, and philosophers contributed to Florence's reputation as a center of Renaissance achievement. The Medici family also established connections with the Catholic Church, with several family members attaining high-ranking positions, including the papacy. Giovanni de' Medici became Pope Leo X in 1513, followed by other Medici popes such as Clement VII and Pius IV. These positions enhanced the family's influence in both religious and political matters, reinforcing their status within Italy and across Europe. The Medici's involvement in religious, political, and cultural affairs reflected their broader strategy of consolidating power through diverse avenues. However, the family's fortunes fluctuated over time, with periods of financial difficulty, political instability, and public dissatisfaction. The Medici Bank's decline in the late 15th century weakened their economic foundation, but the family adapted by leveraging political and dynastic alliances. Over successive generations, the Medici transitioned from influential merchants and bankers to hereditary rulers. In 1532, the Duchy of Florence was established, formalizing Medici rule under Alessandro de' Medici. Later, the family expanded their authority as Grand Dukes of Tuscany, a title held from 1569 onward. The Medici dynasty continued to govern the region until the early 18th century, when their direct line became extinct. Despite the end of Medici rule, their legacy persisted through the architectural, artistic, and cultural contributions that shaped Florence and the wider Renaissance movement. The Medici family's history reflects the intersection of finance, politics, and culture in the development of early modern Europe, illustrating the ways in which economic power could translate into long-lasting political and social influence. Daily life for the nobility and wealthy merchants. Daily life for the nobility and wealthy merchants during the Renaissance period was structured around economic activity, social obligations, political engagement, and the maintenance of family status. The nobility typically derived their wealth from land ownership, rents, and inherited privileges, while wealthy merchants gained economic power through trade, banking, and commercial enterprises. Both groups occupied the upper levels of society and were influential in shaping the political, cultural, and economic life of their respective regions. Their daily routines were organized to reflect their social standing, with activities focused on administration, family affairs, and displays of status. Noble families managed large estates, which required oversight of agricultural production, labor arrangements, and financial accounts. The management of these estates was often delegated to stewards or overseers, but members of the noble family were expected to remain informed about their properties and revenues. Wealthy merchants similarly supervised their business operations, which included trade in goods such as textiles, spices, metals, and other valuable commodities. Merchants maintained detailed records, conducted negotiations, and formed partnerships to expand their commercial interests. Education was an important aspect of daily life for both groups, particularly for sons who were expected to continue the family legacy. Tutors provided instruction in classical languages, history, mathematics, rhetoric, and philosophy. Knowledge of Latin was common among the educated elite, as it was used in legal, religious, and scholarly contexts. For merchants, education also emphasized arithmetic, accounting, and practical skills necessary for managing business ventures. Daughters of noble and wealthy merchant families were often educated in household management, religious instruction, and, in some cases, literature and the arts, depending on the family's resources and priorities. Social obligations played a central role in the daily lives of the nobility and wealthy merchants. Attendance at religious services, participation in ceremonies, and hosting of guests reinforced their social position. Marriage alliances were arranged to strengthen family connections, consolidate wealth, and secure political influence. Weddings, baptisms, and other family events were occasions for formal gatherings that displayed the family's status through attire, hospitality, and public rituals. Residences of the nobility and wealthy merchants were designed to reflect their standing in society. Nobles typically lived in castles, manors, or palaces, often located within fortified towns or on rural estates. Wealthy merchants resided in large urban homes that combined living quarters with spaces for conducting business. These residences were furnished with items that signaled wealth, including fine textiles, imported goods, and artistic works. The maintenance of these homes required the labor of household staff, including servants, cooks, and attendants, who performed daily tasks to support the family's comfort and social functions. Leisure activities for the nobility included hunting, horseback riding, music, and participation in courtly events. Hunting was considered both a sport and a demonstration of status and skill. Music, dancing, and games were common forms of entertainment during gatherings and festivals. Wealthy merchants, though often focused on business affairs, also engaged in similar leisure activities, particularly those that reinforced their social integration with the nobility. Patronage of the arts, architecture, and education was a shared practice among both groups, as commissioning works by artists, architects, and scholars enhanced family prestige. Political involvement was another aspect of daily life, especially for those residing in city-states or regions with active civic institutions. Nobles held hereditary titles and positions of authority, while wealthy merchants could gain political influence through elected offices, advisory councils, or financial support of ruling elites. In many cases, the distinction between the nobility and wealthy merchants blurred, as economic success allowed some merchant families to acquire titles, land, and marriages into noble lineages. Religious practice was integral to the daily routines of both groups. Attendance at Mass, observance of holy days, and support of religious institutions demonstrated piety and reinforced social order. Wealthy families often contributed to the construction or maintenance of churches, chapels, and charitable foundations as acts of devotion and public service. Despite differences in origin and function, the nobility and wealthy merchants shared similar expectations regarding the preservation of family honor, accumulation of wealth, and participation in the cultural and political life of their communities. The lives of commoners, peasants, artisans, and laborers. The lives of commoners during the Renaissance period consisted of routine labor, limited resources, and adherence to established social structures. The majority of the population in both rural and urban areas belonged to the commoner class, which included peasants, artisans, and laborers. Their daily existence was shaped by their occupation, the demands of their environment, and the obligations imposed by economic and social hierarchies. In rural areas, peasants formed the largest segment of the population. Their primary responsibility was agricultural labor, which provided food for both their communities and the urban population. Peasant families typically lived in simple homes constructed from wood, stone, or mud, with minimal furnishings. Daily life centered around subsistence farming, including planting, harvesting, and tending livestock. Most peasants did not own the land they worked on, instead renting it from landlords or owing labor services under feudal arrangements. Their economic situation was vulnerable to poor harvests, disease, and changes in land use. In addition to farming, some rural commoners engaged in seasonal work, small-scale crafts, or trade to supplement their income. Life for peasants was physically demanding, with long hours spent in the fields and limited access to comforts or education. Social interactions in rural villages were largely confined to family units, neighboring households, and religious observances. The local church served as the focal point for spiritual and communal activities, including baptisms, marriages, and religious festivals. Despite harsh living conditions, the rhythms of agricultural life provided structure and continuity for peasant communities. In towns and cities, artisans and laborers made up a significant portion of the working population. Artisans were skilled workers who produced goods such as clothing, shoes, metal tools, pottery, and household items. They operated workshops either independently or within guild structures that regulated production standards, apprenticeships, and trade practices. Guilds provided economic protection and social organization for artisans, ensuring that skills were passed down through generations. Master artisans often employed apprentices and journeymen who learned their craft through years of training. The economic success of artisans varied widely, with some achieving modest prosperity while others struggled to meet basic needs. Laborers performed unskilled or semi-skilled work in construction, transportation, and other physically demanding tasks. Their employment was often irregular, dependent on the availability of work, seasonal changes, or urban development projects. Laborers generally earned low wages, with limited opportunities for advancement. Their living conditions were modest, with shared housing and basic amenities. The health and safety of laborers were often at risk due to the nature of their work and the crowded conditions in urban areas. Disease, poor sanitation, and accidents were common challenges faced by the urban commoner population. Education for commoners was limited, with literacy rates generally low among peasants and laborers. Some artisan families provided basic education for their children, especially in reading, writing, and arithmetic, to support their trade. Religious instruction was more widely accessible, as participation in the church required knowledge of prayers and basic doctrine. Cultural life among commoners included participation in religious festivals, markets, and occasional public events organized by local authorities or wealthy patrons. Entertainment was simple and based on local traditions, music, storytelling, and communal gatherings. Marriage and family life were central to the daily routines of commoners, with extended family networks providing social support and labor resources. Children contributed to household work from an early age, learning the skills necessary for their future roles in agriculture, crafts, or service. The legal and social rights of commoners were limited compared to the nobility or wealthy merchant classes. Peasants were subject to obligations such as taxes, rents, and labor services, with little influence over political decisions. Urban commoners were similarly restricted in their access to power, though guild membership or association with influential patrons could provide some protection or economic stability. Mobility within the commoner class was possible but constrained, with most individuals remaining in the same occupation and social status throughout their lives. Despite their challenges, commoners formed the foundation of society through their labor, production, and contributions to economic life. Their daily existence, though marked by hardship, was essential to the functioning of rural and urban communities during the Renaissance period. Marriage, family, and gender roles in Renaissance society. Marriage, family, and gender roles in Renaissance society were shaped by long-standing traditions, religious teachings, and social expectations that reinforced the hierarchical structure of communities. Marriage was regarded as both a social and economic arrangement designed to preserve family status, secure alliances, and ensure the continuation of lineage. Among the nobility and wealthy merchant classes, marriages were often arranged by families with the goal of strengthening political ties, expanding economic resources, or improving social position. Parents and elders played a significant role in selecting suitable marriage partners, with considerations based on property, dowries, reputation, and family connections. Love or personal preference was generally regarded as secondary to the interests of the family unit. Marriage contracts formalized these arrangements and often included detailed provisions regarding dowries, inheritance rights, and obligations of both parties. Dowries were payments or property brought by the bride to the marriage, providing financial security for the new household and compensation to the groom's family. Among the common classes, marriage arrangements were still influenced by family approval and economic factors, though personal choice had a greater role compared to the upper classes. Family life was structured around clear roles and responsibilities assigned according to gender. The male head of household, usually the husband or father, held legal and social authority over family members. He was responsible for managing household finances, representing the family in public affairs, and providing for the household's material needs. Women were expected to manage domestic responsibilities, care for children, and support the religious and moral development of the family. Education for women was limited and generally focused on preparing them for their roles within marriage and the household. Skills such as sewing, cooking, and managing servants were emphasized, especially for daughters of wealthy families. In noble and merchant households, women sometimes played a role in overseeing business affairs or managing estates, particularly in the absence of their husbands, though their public influence remained restricted. For lower-class women, work in agriculture, crafts, or domestic service supplemented household income. The institution of marriage was reinforced by religious doctrine, with the Catholic Church promoting marriage as a sacrament and essential component of social order. The Church emphasized procreation, fidelity, and the indissoluble nature of marriage. Annulments were rare and divorce was generally prohibited, although separations could occur in specific circumstances. Gender roles were further reinforced through religious teachings that emphasized the subordination of women to men, the importance of obedience, and the virtue of chastity. Men were expected to uphold honor, provide protection, and exercise authority within their families. The legal status of women was subordinate to men, with their rights and opportunities limited by social conventions and legal structures. Women could inherit property or manage family affairs under certain conditions, especially as widows, but their legal autonomy remained constrained. Marriage age varied depending on social class and geographic region, with women typically marrying in their late teens to early 20s and men often marrying later, after establishing financial stability. Childbearing was a central expectation for married women, and large families were common, though high infant mortality rates affected population growth. Family units were often extended, including grandparents, unmarried siblings, and other relatives living within the same household or in close proximity. Gender expectations shaped social interactions and public life, with men occupying positions of political, economic, and cultural authority, while women were largely confined to domestic and supportive roles. Exceptions existed, particularly among influential women in noble or wealthy families, but societal norms largely restricted female participation in public affairs. Education, political power, and artistic recognition were dominated by men, reflecting broader patterns of gender inequality. Despite these limitations, some women contributed to intellectual, artistic, and religious life within the boundaries permitted by society. Marriage, family, and gender roles during the Renaissance reflected the intersection of economic interests, religious beliefs, and social hierarchy. These structures maintained stability and continuity across generations while reinforcing established divisions of labor and authority within both the household and the wider community. Education and the rise of humanism. Education and the rise of humanism during the Renaissance marked a period of intellectual development that emphasized the study of classical texts, individual potential, and secular knowledge alongside religious instruction. Humanism emerged as a cultural and educational movement that focused on the revival of ancient Greek and Roman literature, philosophy, and history. This movement influenced the structure and purpose of education, particularly among the nobility, wealthy merchants, and the educated elite in European society. Humanist scholars believed that the study of classical works could improve moral character, develop rational thinking, and cultivate civic responsibility. Education during this period increasingly reflected these values, with curricula designed to provide students with knowledge of the humanities, including grammar, rhetoric, poetry, history, and moral philosophy. Latin remained the primary language of instruction, serving as the medium for scholarly communication and the study of ancient texts. In some regions, Greek was also taught to enable direct engagement with original sources. The rise of humanism contributed to the establishment and growth of schools, universities, and academies, particularly in Italian city-states such as Florence, Venice, and Rome. Wealthy families often provided private tutors for their children, focusing on classical education and preparation for roles in public life. For young men, education was seen as essential for participation in government, diplomacy, and intellectual pursuits. Schools designed for the education of boys emphasized reading, writing, arithmetic, and the study of classical literature. The goal of this instruction was to produce individuals who could think critically, communicate effectively, and contribute to the cultural and political life of their communities. Humanist education also stressed the importance of moral development, with students encouraged to emulate the virtues of historical and literary figures from antiquity. While education for girls was more limited and focused primarily on domestic skills, some daughters of noble or wealthy families received instruction in reading, writing, and religious studies. In rare cases, women from privileged backgrounds engaged in humanist learning, contributing to intellectual and cultural discussions within acceptable social boundaries. Humanist scholars such as Petrarch, Erasmus, and Leonardo Bruni played a significant role in promoting the study of the humanities and advocating for educational reform. Their works emphasized the value of critical inquiry, textual analysis, and the application of knowledge to civic life. The printing press, introduced in the mid-15th century, facilitated the spread of humanist ideas by making books more accessible and enabling the distribution of classical texts, scholarly commentaries, and educational materials across Europe. Universities continued to provide advanced education, primarily in theology, law, and medicine. But humanist subjects increasingly gained prominence within these institutions. Academies, often established by patrons or intellectual societies, provided additional venues for scholarly exchange, literary production, and the promotion of humanist principles. The integration of classical studies into education contributed to broader cultural developments, including advances in art, architecture, literature, and science. Artists, architects, and writers drew inspiration from ancient models, incorporating humanist ideals into their work. Scientific inquiry also benefited from the emphasis on observation, empirical evidence, and critical analysis promoted by humanist education. The rise of humanism did not entirely displace religious instruction, as the Catholic Church remained a central authority in education and intellectual life. Many humanist scholars were devout Christians who sought to reconcile classical learning with religious faith. Educational institutions often operated under church oversight, and theological studies continued to form a core component of university curricula. However, the humanist emphasis on secular knowledge, individual potential, and civic engagement reflected a gradual shift in educational priorities and intellectual outlook. The legacy of education and humanism during the Renaissance extended beyond the period itself, influencing the development of modern educational systems, the emphasis on liberal arts, and the value placed on critical thinking and cultural literacy. The rise of humanism contributed to the transformation of European society by fostering a more comprehensive approach to learning that integrated classical knowledge with contemporary needs, shaping the intellectual foundation for subsequent cultural and scientific advancements. Guilds and the artisan economy. How people made a living. Guilds and the artisan economy played a central role in shaping how people made a living during the late medieval period and the Renaissance. In both towns and cities, guilds organized skilled workers, regulated production standards, and protected the economic interests of their members. These associations were formed by artisans, merchants, and craftsmen who worked in specific trades such as blacksmithing, weaving, shoemaking, carpentry, and metalworking. Guilds provided a structured framework for economic activity, establishing rules for training, production, quality control, and the marketing of goods. Membership in a guild was often essential for practicing a trade legally within a city or town. Individuals typically entered a trade through an apprenticeship, which could last several years. Young apprentices lived and worked under the supervision of a master craftsman, learning the necessary skills and techniques associated with the trade. After completing the apprenticeship, individuals became journeymen, working for wages while gaining additional experience. To achieve the status of master, a journeyman was required to produce a masterpiece, demonstrating competence in the trade. Successful completion of this process allowed the individual to establish their own workshop, employ apprentices and journeymen, and participate fully in guild activities. Guilds also functioned as social and religious organizations, fostering a sense of community among their members. They organized religious festivals, processions, and charitable activities, contributing to the spiritual and social life of the city. Many guilds were associated with patron saints and maintained chapels or altars within local churches. Economic functions of guilds included the regulation of prices, wages, and working conditions. Guild leaders monitored the quality of goods produced, preventing fraud or substandard work. This system of regulation aimed to ensure fairness in competition, protect consumers, and maintain the reputation of the trade. Guilds also negotiated with city authorities, representing the collective interests of their members in matters such as taxation, legal disputes, and trade policies. The artisan economy provided livelihoods for a significant portion of the urban population. Artisans operated small workshops, often attached to their homes, where production was carried out with the assistance of family members, apprentices, and hired laborers. The scale of production varied depending on the trade, location, and demand for goods. Some trades produced essential items for daily use, such as clothing, shoes, tools, and household goods. Others focused on luxury items, including fine textiles, jewelry, and decorative arts, catering to the wealthier segments of society. In addition to local markets, artisans contributed to broader trade networks, supplying goods for regional, national, and international commerce. Cities with strong artisan economies often developed specialized industries. For example, Florence became known for textiles and banking, Venice for shipbuilding and glassmaking, and Milan for metalwork and arms production. The artisan economy was influenced by external factors such as resource availability, technological innovations, and shifting consumer preferences. Advances in tools, techniques, and materials allowed for improved efficiency and product quality. Despite these developments, most production remained labor-intensive, with limited mechanization. The guild system also reinforced social hierarchies within urban communities. Master artisans held considerable status, while apprentices and journeymen occupied lower positions with limited economic security. Women participated in the artisan economy primarily through family workshops, assisting in production and management, although their formal recognition within guilds was restricted. The artisan economy faced competition from large-scale merchants and manufacturers, particularly as markets expanded and demand for mass-produced goods increased. Nonetheless, guilds continued to exert influence over local production, shaping the economic landscape of Renaissance cities. The structure and practices of guilds contributed to economic stability, skill preservation, and social cohesion. Over time, changes in economic organization, technological progress, and political developments challenged the dominance of guilds, leading to their gradual decline in some regions. However, during the height of the Renaissance, guilds and the artisan economy remained integral to urban life, providing employment, regulating trade, and contributing to the cultural and material development of European society. The system of guilds reflected the interconnectedness of work, community, and economic survival for artisans and their families. The importance of trade, silk, spices, and the Italian economy. Trade played a central role in the development of the Italian economy during the late Middle Ages and the Renaissance period. The exchange of goods such as silk, spices, and other luxury commodities contributed to the economic prosperity of Italian city-states and strengthened their connections to wider regional and international markets. Italy's geographic position in the Mediterranean facilitated access to trade routes linking Europe, Asia, and North Africa. Coastal cities including Venice, Genoa, and Pisa served as key ports for merchants who transported goods between the east and the west. Overland routes across the Alps also connected Italy to northern European markets. The demand for silk and spices was significant due to their rarity, value, and association with wealth and status. Silk, originally produced in China and later in parts of the Islamic world, was highly prized for its fine texture and appearance. Italian merchants imported raw silk and finished products, which were either sold domestically or re-exported to other European markets. Some Italian cities, particularly Lucca, Florence, and Venice, developed their own silk industries, producing textiles for domestic consumption and export. The production of silk provided employment for weavers, dyers, and artisans, contributing to the urban economy. Spices such as pepper, cloves, nutmeg, cinnamon, and ginger were also in high demand, valued for their use in cooking, preservation, medicine, and religious rituals. Spices originated in regions including India, Southeast Asia, and the islands of the Indian Ocean. Italian merchants obtained these goods through complex trade networks involving Arab, Persian, and later Ottoman intermediaries. Spices were transported to Mediterranean ports and distributed throughout Europe, often commanding high prices due to their scarcity and the risks associated with long-distance trade. The profits from trade in silk, spices, and other luxury items contributed to the wealth of merchant families, banking institutions, and city governments. Wealth generated from trade supported urban development, public works, and cultural patronage. Merchant families, such as the Medici in Florence and the Fugger family, with connections to Italy, accumulated significant economic and political influence through their involvement in trade and finance. Italian city-states competed for control of trade routes and commercial privileges, leading to rivalries, and occasional conflicts. Venice and Genoa were among the most powerful maritime republics, each maintaining fleets of ships, establishing trading posts, and negotiating treaties to secure access to markets and resources. Their naval strength allowed them to protect merchant vessels, expand trade networks, and influence regional politics. Venice, in particular, became a major hub for the distribution of goods arriving from the east. Its strategic location at the head of the Adriatic Sea enabled Venetian merchants to dominate trade routes into Europe. The city established commercial outposts and diplomatic relations with the Byzantine Empire, Islamic states, and later the Ottoman Empire, facilitating the flow of goods and information. In addition to silk and spices, Italian merchants traded other commodities such as wool, linen, glassware, ceramics, and metal goods. Italian banking and financial services supported commercial activities, providing credit, currency exchange, and investment for merchants engaged in long-distance trade. Trade fairs, markets, and merchant guilds regulated economic activity, setting standards for transactions and resolving disputes. The prosperity generated by trade also contributed to social changes, with merchant families gaining economic power and social status. This wealth supported the rise of patronage systems, where merchants and bankers commissioned works of art, architecture, and scholarship, contributing to the cultural achievements of the Renaissance. The importance of trade to the Italian economy was further reinforced by urbanization, as growing cities provided markets for goods and centers for production. Trade also exposed Italian society to new ideas, technologies, and cultural influences from other regions, contributing to intellectual and artistic developments. However, dependence on trade also made Italian city-states vulnerable to external factors such as shifting trade routes, military conflicts, and competition from emerging powers. The rise of Atlantic trade routes in the late 15th and 16th centuries gradually reduced the dominance of Mediterranean trade, impacting the Italian economy. Despite these changes, the historical importance of silk, spices, and commerce to the Italian economy remains evident in the development of its cities, the wealth of its merchant class, and its contributions to European economic and cultural history. Architecture and urban life. How cities were built. Architecture and urban life during the Renaissance period were shaped by the practical needs of growing populations, the influence of classical antiquity, and the desire to display wealth and civic pride. Cities were built according to established traditions, geographic constraints, and the resources available to their inhabitants. Urban centers served as hubs for trade, government, religious activity, and social interaction, requiring the construction of functional spaces that supported economic, political, and cultural life. City layouts were often irregular, with narrow streets, dense clusters of buildings, and limited open space, reflecting gradual growth over time rather than formal planning. In some cases, especially in newly developed areas or during periods of reconstruction, urban planning incorporated more organized street grids and public spaces. Defensive walls surrounded many cities, providing protection against external threats and defining the boundaries of urban life. Gates and watchtowers controlled access, while walls were periodically expanded to accommodate population growth. Within these walls, city structures included residential buildings, marketplaces, workshops, religious institutions, and public buildings. Residences varied according to social class and wealth. The nobility and wealthy merchants occupied large homes or palaces constructed with durable materials such as stone or brick. These residences featured multiple stories, interior courtyards, and private chapels, reflecting the status of their owners. In contrast, commoners lived in modest dwellings with simpler construction, often located in densely populated neighborhoods near their places of work. Artisan workshops were frequently attached to residences, allowing for the integration of living and working spaces. Public buildings included town halls, administrative offices, and law courts, which served as centers for governance and civic affairs. Markets and commercial districts were essential for the distribution of goods, with stalls, shops, and warehouses supporting local trade and long-distance commerce. The construction of bridges, roads, and port facilities facilitated transportation and communication within and beyond the city. Religious architecture occupied a prominent place in urban life. Churches, cathedrals, monasteries, and chapels were built to accommodate worship, community gatherings, and religious instruction. These structures were often located in central squares or along major streets, reinforcing the importance of religion in daily life. Architectural styles evolved over time, with the Renaissance period marking a revival of classical forms, including columns, domes, arches, and proportionate designs inspired by ancient Roman and Greek models. Architects such as Filippo Brunelleschi, Leon Battista Alberti, and Andrea Palladio contributed to the development of Renaissance architecture, emphasizing symmetry, harmony, and geometric order. Public spaces such as piazzas, plazas, and courtyards provided areas for social interaction, markets, and civic ceremonies. Fountains, statues, and other decorative elements enhanced these spaces, reflecting both aesthetic considerations and civic identity. Urban life was structured around the interaction of residents in markets, religious services, political assemblies, and social events. Streets and squares were used for festivals, processions, and daily commerce, contributing to the vibrant but often crowded atmosphere of city life. Sanitation, water supply, and waste management were ongoing challenges in urban areas. Cities constructed aqueducts, wells, and fountains to provide water, while waste was managed through a combination of public regulations and private responsibility. Overcrowding, poor sanitation, and the risk of disease were common concerns, particularly in densely populated districts. Urban development was influenced by economic activity, with trade, banking, and artisan production driving the growth of cities such as Florence, Venice, and Milan. The prosperity generated by commerce supported investment in architecture, public works, and infrastructure. City governments, guilds, and wealthy families financed the construction of religious buildings, public squares, and defensive structures, contributing to both practical needs and displays of prestige. Cultural life in cities was supported by educational institutions, artistic production, and intellectual gatherings, often housed in purpose-built structures such as libraries, academies, and theatres. The physical design of cities reflected both the functional requirements of daily life and the cultural aspirations of their inhabitants. Architecture and urban development during the Renaissance were thus shaped by a combination of tradition, innovation, and the evolving needs of urban populations, contributing to the lasting legacy of European cityscapes. Leonardo da Vinci, the ultimate Renaissance man. Leonardo da Vinci is often regarded as the ultimate Renaissance man due to his extensive contributions to art, science, engineering, and intellectual inquiry. Born on the 15th of April, 1452, in Vinci, a small town in the Republic of Florence, he was the illegitimate son of a local notary and a peasant woman. Despite his birth status, Leonardo received an education that allowed him to develop skills in various disciplines. At a young age, he was sent to Florence, where he became an apprentice to the artist Andrea del Verrocchio. During his apprenticeship, Leonardo learned the fundamentals of painting, sculpture, and technical drawing, along with practical knowledge related to mechanics and engineering. His early artistic work demonstrated an attention to detail and a commitment to accurate observation, which remained consistent throughout his career. Leonardo's reputation as an artist grew, and he produced works that are now considered central to the history of Western art. His paintings include The Last Supper, a mural located in Milan that depicts the moment Jesus informs his disciples of his forthcoming betrayal, and Mona Lisa, a portrait known for its composition, atmospheric effects, and depiction of subtle human emotion. Leonardo applied techniques such as sfumato, a method of softening transitions between colors and tones, which added to the realism of his paintings. His approach combined technical precision with a desire to represent the complexities of nature and the human form. In addition to his work as an artist, Leonardo conducted studies in anatomy, engineering, architecture, and various branches of science. His anatomical investigations involved the dissection of human and animal bodies to understand their internal structures. Through detailed drawings, he recorded the mechanics of muscles, bones, and organs, producing illustrations that were more accurate than many existing anatomical texts of the period. These studies were part of his broader effort to explore the functions of living organisms through direct observation and empirical analysis. Leonardo's scientific interests extended to engineering and the design of mechanical devices. His notebooks contain sketches and theoretical plans for machines such as flying apparatuses, water pumps, armored vehicles, and other inventions. While many of these designs were never constructed during his lifetime, they reflect his innovative thinking and his efforts to apply scientific principles to practical challenges. Leonardo also studied natural phenomena, including water flow, geology, and the behavior of light. His written observations demonstrate a systematic approach to understanding the natural world, combining careful observation with logical reasoning. Throughout his life, Leonardo worked for a variety of patrons, including the Duke of Milan, Ludovico Sforza, for whom he produced artworks, architectural designs, and military engineering plans. Later, he worked in Florence, Rome, and eventually France, where he spent his final years under the patronage of King Francis I. Despite his many achievements, Leonardo left behind numerous unfinished works and projects, reflecting his broad intellectual interests and his tendency to explore new ideas continuously. His notebooks, which survive in various collections, contain extensive records of his thoughts, sketches, and experiments across multiple disciplines. These notebooks provide insight into his working methods and his integrated approach to art and science. Leonardo's work exemplifies the ideals of Renaissance humanism, which emphasized the value of education, individual potential, and the pursuit of knowledge across diverse fields. His contributions influenced both his contemporaries and later generations, shaping the development of art, science, and engineering. Leonardo da Vinci died on May 2, 1519, in Amboise, France. His legacy is reflected not only in his surviving artworks, but also in his influence on scientific thought and the enduring image of the Renaissance man as an individual skilled in multiple disciplines. His life illustrates the intellectual environment of the Renaissance, marked by curiosity, empirical investigation, and the integration of knowledge. Leonardo's achievements demonstrate the interconnectedness of artistic creativity and scientific inquiry, establishing him as a central figure in the cultural and intellectual history of Europe. His work continues to be studied for its historical significance and its contribution to the understanding of art, science, and human potential. Michelangelo and the power of sculpture and painting. Michelangelo Buonarroti is regarded as one of the most significant figures of the Renaissance period due to his contributions to sculpture, painting, and architecture. Born on the 6th of March, 1475, in Caprese, in the Republic of Florence, Michelangelo demonstrated artistic talent from a young age. He was apprenticed to the painter Domenico Ghirlandaio, where he received instruction in the techniques of drawing and fresco painting. His early exposure to classical art and human anatomy influenced his later work, which combined technical skill with an emphasis on the representation of the human form. Michelangelo's achievements in sculpture are among his most recognized contributions. His sculptures are noted for their scale, detail, and anatomical precision, reflecting both his study of the human body and his ability to work with marble. One of his most famous sculptures is the Pietà, completed in 1499, which depicts the Virgin Mary holding the body of Christ after the crucifixion. This work is housed in St. Peter's Basilica in Vatican City and is known for its detailed rendering of fabric, flesh, and emotion achieved through careful carving techniques. Another significant sculpture is David, completed between 1501 and 1504, which represents the biblical figure as a symbol of strength and civic pride. The statue stands over 5 meters tall and demonstrates Michelangelo's mastery of proportion, anatomical structure, and expression. David was commissioned by the city of Florence and became a public symbol of the city's independence and republican values. In addition to sculpture, Michelangelo was an accomplished painter. His most well-known work in painting is the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in Vatican City, completed between 1508 and 1512 under the patronage of Pope Julius II. The ceiling consists of a series of frescoes that depict scenes from the Book of Genesis, including the creation of Adam, the fall of man, and the Great Flood. The frescoes are recognized for their complex compositions, dynamic figures, and use of perspective to create a sense of depth on a flat surface. Michelangelo's approach to painting emphasized the human body as a vehicle for expression, incorporating muscular forms, detailed anatomy, and varied postures. His depiction of figures on the Sistine Chapel ceiling demonstrates his knowledge of sculptural form applied to two-dimensional surfaces. Michelangelo also painted The Last Judgment, located on the altar wall of the Sistine Chapel, completed between 1536 and 1541. This fresco represents the second coming of Christ and the final judgment of souls. It contains over 300 figures and reflects both Michelangelo's artistic skill and his engagement with religious themes. In addition to his work in sculpture and painting, Michelangelo contributed to architecture, including the design of the dome of St. Peter's Basilica, which was completed after his death based on his plans. His architectural work emphasized structural clarity, classical forms and the integration of function with visual harmony. Michelangelo's artistic achievements were supported by commissions from religious institutions, civic authorities, and influential patrons such as the Medici family and the papacy. His work reflects the Renaissance emphasis on individual artistic genius, technical mastery, and the revival of classical antiquity. Throughout his career, Michelangelo maintained a focus on the human figure as the central subject of artistic expression. His study of anatomy, proportion, and movement informed his approach to both sculpture and painting, contributing to the naturalism and realism that characterized Renaissance art. Michelangelo's influence extended beyond his lifetime, shaping the development of Western art and serving as a model for later artists. His work demonstrated the potential of sculpture and painting to convey complex themes, religious narratives, and human emotion through careful observation and technical precision. Michelangelo died on the 18th of February, 1564, in Rome. His legacy is preserved through his surviving works, which continue to be studied for their artistic, historical, and cultural significance. Michelangelo's contributions to sculpture and painting illustrate the power of visual art to communicate ideas, represent the human form, and reflect the intellectual environment of the Renaissance. His achievements remain central to the history of art and the ongoing appreciation of artistic skill and innovation, the printing press and the spread of knowledge. The invention of the printing press marked a significant development in the spread of knowledge during the late medieval period and the Renaissance. Introduced in the mid-15th century by Johannes Gutenberg in the city of Mainz, Germany, the printing press used movable metal type to produce texts more efficiently and in greater quantities than traditional manuscript copying. Prior to this invention, books and written materials were copied by hand, a labor-intensive process that limited the availability, speed, and affordability of written works. Gutenberg's press allowed for the rapid production of books, pamphlets, and other documents, significantly increasing access to written knowledge. One of the earliest major works produced with the printing press was the Gutenberg Bible, completed around 1455. This project demonstrated the practical application of movable type for large-scale production and established the potential for widespread dissemination of religious and scholarly texts. Following its introduction, the printing press spread to other European cities, including Venice, Paris, and London. The rapid adoption of printing technology facilitated the growth of a print industry that supplied books to universities, religious institutions, government offices, and private individuals. The increased availability of books contributed to higher literacy rates, although access to printed materials remained more common among educated elites and urban populations. Printed works covered a wide range of subjects, including religion, science, philosophy, history, and literature. Religious texts, particularly the Bible, were produced in large quantities, supporting both traditional religious practices and the emerging movements of religious reform. The printing press played a central role in the Protestant Reformation by enabling the rapid distribution of reformist writings, including those of Martin Luther and other critics of the Catholic Church. The ability to print pamphlets, treatises, and translations of the Bible into vernacular languages allowed reformers to communicate their ideas to a broad audience. In addition to religious works, scientific and technical knowledge spread more efficiently through printed books. Scholars and inventors published treatises on subjects such as astronomy, medicine, mathematics, and engineering, facilitating the exchange of ideas across geographic and linguistic boundaries. The work of figures such as Nicolaus Copernicus, whose heliocentric theory challenged established models of the universe, reached a wider audience through printed publications. Printing technology also supported the dissemination of classical texts, contributing to the humanist movement and the Renaissance emphasis on the study of ancient literature and philosophy. The recovery, editing, and printing of Greek and Roman texts allowed scholars to engage with primary sources and develop new interpretations. The standardization of texts through printing reduced errors and inconsistencies common in hand-copied manuscripts. Printed books also helped establish uniform language usage, grammar, and spelling, contributing to the development of standardized national languages. Printers often worked in collaboration with scholars, editors, and translators to produce accurate and accessible editions of important works. The growth of print culture affected education by increasing the availability of textbooks and reference materials. Universities and schools benefited from access to affordable printed resources, which supported the spread of knowledge and the training of students in various fields. The printing press also contributed to the development of public libraries and private book collections. The expansion of printed materials influenced social and cultural life by making information more accessible to a broader segment of society. News, political commentary, and entertainment literature reached new audiences, shaping public opinion and promoting intellectual engagement. Despite its many advantages, the printing press also faced challenges, including censorship, regulation, and control by political and religious authorities. Governments and church leaders sought to monitor and restrict the publication of materials deemed heretical, seditious, or morally objectionable. Nevertheless, the printing press fundamentally changed the way knowledge was produced, preserved, and shared. It facilitated the intellectual developments of the Renaissance, the scientific revolution, and the Reformation by providing a means for the rapid and wide dissemination of information. The long-term impact of the printing press is evident in the continuing importance of printed texts for education, communication, and cultural exchange. Renaissance fashion. How Italians dressed. Renaissance fashion in Italy reflected the social status, wealth, and cultural influences of the period, with clothing serving both functional and symbolic purposes. The way Italians dressed during the Renaissance was shaped by materials available through trade, local traditions, and the influence of classical antiquity. Clothing varied according to social class, gender, and regional customs, with distinctions between the attire of the nobility, wealthy merchants, artisans, and commoners. Members of the nobility and upper classes wore garments made from expensive materials such as silk, velvet, brocade, and fine wool. These fabrics were often imported from other regions through established trade networks, contributing to the Italian economy and the availability of luxury textiles. The wealthiest individuals used their clothing to display status through the use of rich fabrics, elaborate patterns, and decorative elements such as embroidery, jewels, and metallic threads. Outfits were designed to demonstrate both social position and adherence to the aesthetic ideals of the time. For men, clothing consisted of a shirt made from linen worn under a doublet, which was a close-fitting, padded jacket. Over the doublet, men wore hose or fitted trousers that covered the legs. In colder weather or formal settings, a cloak or mantle was added for warmth and style. The overall silhouette emphasized broad shoulders and a narrow waist, with tailored garments contributing to this effect. Accessories such as belts, gloves, and hats completed the outfit, with specific styles varying by region and personal preference. Footwear for men included soft leather shoes or boots, often decorated to match the outfit. Women's fashion included a chemise or underdress made from linen, worn beneath a gown that varied in style depending on the occasion and social status. The gown often featured a fitted bodice, wide sleeves, and a full skirt, designed to emphasize the waist and upper body. High-quality fabrics such as silk and brocade were favored among wealthy women, with additional decoration provided by embroidery, lace, or jewels. Outer garments, such as cloaks or capes, were worn for warmth or modesty, while veils, headdresses, and jewelry completed the ensemble. Hairstyles for women were styled to conform to contemporary ideals of beauty, with hair often arranged in braids or coils, sometimes covered by decorative nets, ribbons, or veils. Married women were generally expected to cover their hair in public as a sign of modesty and respectability. Fashion also served to communicate family alliances, political connections, and regional identity through the use of colors, symbols, and patterns associated with particular groups or cities. Sumptuary laws regulated clothing in many Italian city-states, restricting the use of certain fabrics, colors, or decorations to specific classes or prohibiting excessive display of wealth. These laws aimed to maintain social order by ensuring that clothing reflected a person's legal and social status. Despite such regulations, fashion trends often changed as individuals sought to adopt new styles or materials. Artisans, merchants, and skilled workers also dressed according to their means, with clothing made from more affordable materials such as wool or linen. Garments for the working classes were simpler in design, prioritizing durability and practicality over ornamentation. However, individuals in prosperous trades might adopt elements of fashionable dress within the limits of their resources and social position. Clothing for commoners was generally less colorful and less elaborately decorated than that of the upper classes. In addition to everyday clothing, ceremonial dress played an important role in religious, civic, and family events. Weddings, religious festivals, and public ceremonies provided occasions for individuals to wear their finest attire, reinforcing social hierarchy and communal identity. Clothing also reflected regional differences, with variations in cut, color, and ornamentation distinguishing cities such as Florence, Venice, and Milan. Renaissance fashion was influenced by the revival of classical antiquity, with styles incorporating references to ancient Greek and Roman clothing. This influence was visible in the use of draped fabrics, classical motifs, and balanced proportions. Fashion in Italy during the Renaissance was thus a reflection of social structure, economic conditions, and cultural trends, providing insight into the values and daily life of Italian society during this period. The dark side: crime, punishments, and the justice system. Crime, punishments, and the justice system during the Renaissance period in Europe reflected the social, political, and legal structures of the time. While Renaissance society is often associated with artistic achievements and intellectual advancements, it also experienced significant challenges related to law enforcement, criminal behavior, and social order. Cities and towns faced issues such as theft, assault, fraud, and murder, along with crimes specific to the period, including heresy, witchcraft, and political conspiracy. The justice system aimed to maintain public order, protect property, and enforce moral standards, but it was shaped by the limitations of contemporary legal knowledge, social hierarchies, and political interests. Law enforcement in Renaissance Europe varied by region, with different city-states, kingdoms, and territories developing their own legal codes and systems of administration. Local magistrates, judges, and city officials were responsible for overseeing justice, supported by constables, guards, and other personnel. Urban areas often established watchmen to patrol streets at night, deter criminal activity, and respond to disturbances. However, the effectiveness of law enforcement depended on available resources, the size of the population, and the cooperation of local communities. Detection and investigation of crimes were limited by the absence of modern forensic techniques, relying instead on witness testimony, confessions, and community reports. Accusations were sometimes driven by personal disputes, rivalries, or political motivations, complicating the pursuit of impartial justice. Trials were conducted in local courts, with proceedings overseen by judges, magistrates, or other appointed officials. The process typically involved hearing evidence, questioning witnesses, and considering written or oral testimony. Defendants were expected to respond to charges, but legal representation and protections for the accused were limited compared to modern standards. Verdicts were influenced by available evidence, social status, and the discretion of the authorities. Punishments for crimes varied widely based on the severity of the offense, the social position of the accused, and local customs. Minor offenses, such as petty theft, public disorder, or violations of sumptuary laws, could result in fines, public shaming, or short-term imprisonment. More serious crimes, including violent assault, robbery, or fraud, carried harsher penalties, including corporal punishment, exile, or long-term imprisonment. Capital punishment was applied for the most severe offences, such as murder, treason, or repeated criminal behaviour. Execution methods included hanging, beheading, and burning, often carried out in public to serve as a deterrent. In some cases, torture was used to extract confessions or information justified by authorities as necessary for establishing guilt or protecting public order. The use of torture was regulated by legal procedures, but frequently subject to abuse and excessive application. The justice system also addressed moral and religious offences, reflecting the influence of the Catholic Church and prevailing social norms. Heresy, blasphemy, and witchcraft were considered serious crimes, with individuals accused of challenging religious orthodoxy, engaging in forbidden practices, or causing harm through supernatural means. The Inquisition, established by the Church, operated as a formal tribunal to investigate and prosecute cases of heresy and related offences, employing interrogation, evidence collection, and trial proceedings. Punishments for religious crimes ranged from penance and public humiliation to imprisonment or execution, depending on the perceived threat to religious authority and social stability. Social status played a significant role in the administration of justice, with members of the nobility and wealthy merchant classes often receiving more lenient treatment or preferential access to legal remedies. Commoners, artisans, and labourers faced harsher penalties and had fewer resources to defend themselves. Women were subject to gender-based discrimination in legal proceedings, with limited rights and protections compared to men. Accusations against women, particularly in cases of witchcraft or moral offences, reflected broader social attitudes toward gender and authority. The justice system also incorporated elements of restorative practices, including compensation for victims, mediation of disputes, and community-based resolutions. Civil cases involving property, contracts, or inheritance were addressed through legal channels, contributing to the regulation of economic activity and social relations. Despite efforts to maintain order, crime persisted as a challenge in both rural and urban areas, driven by poverty, inequality, and political instability. Food and feasting. What people ate in Renaissance Italy. Food and feasting in Renaissance Italy reflected both the agricultural resources of the region and the social structure of the time. What people ate varied significantly according to their social status, wealth, and geographic location. The majority of the population, including peasants, artisans, and laborers, consumed simple, staple foods that were available locally and depended on seasonal harvests. Bread was a central part of the daily diet for most people, with wheat bread being preferred among the wealthier classes and bread made from rye, barley, or other grains consumed by the lower classes. Bread was often accompanied by soups, stews, and porridges made from legumes, grains, or vegetables. Common vegetables included onions, cabbage, beans, garlic, and leeks. These ingredients provided basic nutrition and were widely cultivated in household gardens or local fields. Meat consumption was less frequent among the lower classes due to its cost, though pork, poultry, and small game were sometimes available. Salted or dried fish, especially in coastal regions, provided additional sources of protein. Olive oil was commonly used in cooking, particularly in central and southern Italy, while butter and animal fats were more typical in northern areas. Dairy products such as cheese and milk were part of the rural diet, with varieties of cheese produced in different regions according to local traditions. Fruits such as apples, pears, figs, and grapes were eaten fresh when in season or preserved by drying. Wine was widely consumed across all social classes, though its quality varied, with the wealthier population having access to finer vintages. Water quality in urban areas was sometimes unreliable, contributing to the popularity of wine as a safer alternative. The wealthy classes enjoyed more diverse and elaborate diets. Their meals included a variety of meats, such as beef, veal, lamb, and game, along with freshwater and saltwater fish. Exotic spices, including pepper, cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg, were used to flavor dishes, reflecting the influence of trade and the wealth required to afford imported goods. Sugar, though expensive, was used in confections and for preserving fruits. Wealthy households also had access to imported foods such as rice, almonds, and citrus fruits, which were incorporated into both sweet and savory dishes. Banquets and feasts were opportunities for the upper classes to display wealth, status, and hospitality. These events featured multiple courses served in a formal sequence, often accompanied by entertainment such as music or performances. The presentation of food was designed to impress, with decorative displays, elaborate serving vessels, and carefully arranged dishes. During these occasions, diners were expected to follow specific etiquette, with meals serving as both social and political functions. Pasta dishes were consumed in various forms, with different regions producing their own types of noodles and preparations. Though pasta was eaten by different social classes, the quality of ingredients and complexity of recipes differed according to economic status. Sauces and accompaniments often included cheese, herbs, and, for the wealthier, spices or meat-based preparations. Religious practices influenced dietary habits, with fasting and abstinence observed during specific days or seasons, particularly Lent. During these times, meat consumption was restricted, and meals focused on fish, vegetables, and legumes. Religious festivals and holidays, in contrast, were marked by special foods and feasting, reinforcing communal identity and tradition. Markets in cities and towns provided access to a variety of foodstuffs, with vendors selling fresh produce, bread, meat, fish, and other goods. Rural areas relied more heavily on subsistence agriculture, with households producing much of their own food. Food preservation techniques, including salting, drying, and pickling, allowed for storage of surplus produce and ensured food availability during periods of scarcity. Social distinctions were evident not only in the types of food consumed but also in dining practices. The wealthy dined from fine tableware made of ceramics, glass, or metal, while the lower classes used simpler wooden or earthenware dishes. Seating arrangements, serving practices, and table manners reflected social hierarchies, reinforcing distinctions between different groups within society. Despite regional differences in ingredients and culinary styles, Renaissance Italy shared common features in its food culture, combining local agricultural products with influences from trade, tradition, and social customs. The diet of Renaissance Italians reflected both the resources of their environment and the broader economic and cultural developments of the period. Festivals, carnivals, and public celebrations. Festivals, carnivals, and public celebrations were an important part of social life in Renaissance Italy, providing structured occasions for entertainment, religious observance, and expressions of civic pride. These events occurred regularly throughout the year, marking religious holidays, agricultural cycles, significant political events, and communal traditions. Participation in festivals was widespread across different social classes, though the nature and scale of celebrations varied based on local customs, economic resources, and the status of individuals involved. Religious festivals were central to public life and were observed in cities, towns, and villages across Italy. The liturgical calendar provided numerous occasions for celebration, including Christmas, Easter, Pentecost, and the feast days of saints. These events were organized by religious institutions such as parish churches, monasteries, and confraternities, with support from civic authorities and wealthy patrons. Religious processions were common features of these festivals, involving clergy, lay participants, and decorated images or relics carried through the streets. Music, prayers, and symbolic acts accompanied these processions, reinforcing religious devotion and communal identity. Many religious festivals also included theatrical performances, mystery plays, and reenactments of biblical scenes, providing both instruction and entertainment for the public. In addition to religious festivals, carnivals represented a significant period of public celebration that preceded the Lenten season. Carnival celebrations involved masquerades, costumes, music, dances, and street performances, creating an atmosphere of temporary social relaxation and role reversal. Participants often wore masks and elaborate clothing, allowing for anonymity and playful interaction among different social groups. Carnival provided an outlet for humor, satire, and social commentary, though activities were generally regulated by local authorities to maintain order. In cities such as Venice and Florence, carnival festivities were well organized, with competitions, games, and performances arranged by guilds, civic institutions, and private sponsors. Public celebrations also marked important political and civic events, including royal visits, military victories, the installation of new rulers, and diplomatic occasions. These events were opportunities to display civic unity, reinforce political authority, and showcase the cultural achievements of the community. Decorations, pageantry, and performances were arranged to create an impressive visual and auditory spectacle. Triumphal arches, banners, and temporary structures were constructed to enhance the appearance of public spaces. Fireworks, music, and formal ceremonies added to the celebratory atmosphere. Festivals often included competitions such as jousts, foot races, and other athletic contests, reflecting the importance of physical skill and public entertainment. Guilds, religious confraternities, and neighborhood associations played key roles in organizing and sponsoring festival activities. Their involvement demonstrated the interconnectedness of social, religious, and economic life in Renaissance cities. Public celebrations served to reinforce social hierarchies with distinctions in seating, participation, and access to specific events, reflecting the status of individuals and groups. Wealthy families and patrons often contributed to the funding and organization of festivals, enhancing their social prestige and political influence. At the same time, festivals provided opportunities for the general population to engage in communal activities, access entertainment, and express collective identity. Agricultural festivals celebrated seasonal cycles, such as harvests and planting periods, combining religious observance with communal gatherings. These events included blessings of crops, communal meals, dances, and music, reinforcing the relationship between agricultural production, religious practices, and social life. In rural areas, these festivals provided rare opportunities for large-scale gatherings and social interaction beyond the household or village. Public celebrations were also associated with specific trades and crafts, with guilds organizing feast days and processions dedicated to patron saints or significant dates. These events reinforced the professional identity of guild members and contributed to the cohesion of economic and social groups within urban communities. Despite the joyful nature of many festivals, authorities monitored public celebrations to prevent disorder, excess, or activities that challenged moral or political norms. Restrictions were sometimes placed on costumes, public behavior, or the content of performances to maintain control and uphold decorum. The role of women? Queens, writers, and artists. The role of women during the Renaissance period was shaped by social, political, and cultural expectations that generally emphasized domestic responsibilities, family obligations, and limited public participation. However, within these boundaries, some women achieved influence and recognition as queens, writers, and artists. Their contributions reflected both individual circumstances and the broader conditions of Renaissance society. Queens and noblewomen played significant roles in political life through marriage alliances, dynastic responsibilities, and occasional governance. Marriages among royal and noble families were arranged to secure political alliances, territorial claims, and peace treaties. As queens, women were expected to support their husbands' rule, bear heirs, and participate in court life. In certain cases, queens acted as regents, governing in the absence or minority of male rulers. Their influence extended to diplomatic correspondence, patronage of the arts, and management of court affairs. Some queens and noblewomen contributed to the cultural development of their courts by sponsoring artists, architects, and scholars. Their patronage reflected both personal interests and the desire to enhance the prestige of their families and territories. Despite their status, queens remained subject to political pressures, family interests, and the limitations imposed by gender expectations. Women also contributed to intellectual and literary life as writers, poets, and scholars. Though access to formal education was limited for women compared to men, some received instruction in reading, writing, and classical studies, particularly within elite families. Women who engaged in writing often produced works focused on religious themes, morality, or social commentary. Their writings reflected both personal experiences and broader reflections on gender, education, and society. One of the most recognized female writers of the period was Christine de Pizan, known for her works advocating for the education and moral worth of women. Her texts, including The Book of the City of Ladies, addressed the intellectual and social potential of women, challenging prevailing stereotypes. Other women produced poetry, letters, and philosophical works. Though their opportunities for publication and public recognition were constrained by social conventions. Female artists during the Renaissance also contributed to cultural production, though they faced significant barriers to training, patronage, and professional advancement. Artistic instruction was typically provided through workshops and guilds, where access for women was restricted. Some women received artistic training within their families, particularly when fathers or brothers were established artists. Female artists often specialized in portraiture, religious imagery, or still life, with commissions coming from private patrons or religious institutions. Sofonisba Anguissola is one of the most notable female painters of the Renaissance, recognized for her portraits and courtly commissions. Her work demonstrates technical skill, attention to detail, and engagement with contemporary artistic styles. Other women, including Lavinia Fontana and Artemisia Gentileschi, achieved recognition for their paintings, though their careers often required navigating societal expectations and limitations placed on women in the arts. Despite these achievements, female artists were less likely to receive public commissions or formal recognition compared to their male counterparts. Women's participation in public life remained limited by legal and social structures that emphasized their roles as daughters, wives, and mothers. Education for women was generally focused on preparing them for domestic responsibilities, religious instruction, and social etiquette. Literacy rates among women varied by region and social class, with higher rates among urban and elite families. Religious institutions provided some educational opportunities for women, particularly within convents, where women could engage in scholarship, artistic production, and spiritual leadership. Nuns played roles in preserving knowledge, producing illuminated manuscripts, and maintaining religious traditions. In some cases, women participated in civic life through charitable activities, religious confraternities, and cultural patronage. Their involvement in these areas reflected both personal piety and social obligations. Women's roles during the Renaissance were defined by a combination of tradition, family expectations, and limited access to formal power. Nonetheless, individuals such as queens, writers, and artists demonstrated the ways in which women could contribute to political, intellectual, and cultural life within the constraints of their time. Their achievements illustrate the complexity of gender roles and the varied experiences of women during the Renaissance period. The decline of the Italian Renaissance. What went wrong? The decline of the Italian Renaissance was the result of multiple interconnected political, economic, and social factors that gradually weakened the conditions that had once supported the cultural and intellectual achievements of the period. The Italian Renaissance began in the late 14th century and reached its peak during the 15th and early 16th centuries, marked by advancements in art, architecture, science, literature, and philosophy. However, by the later 16th century, the momentum of the Renaissance began to diminish. One of the major factors contributing to the decline was the ongoing political instability in the Italian peninsula. Italy remained divided into numerous independent city-states, such as Florence, Venice, Milan, Naples, and the Papal States. While this fragmentation had initially fostered competition and cultural patronage, it also made Italy vulnerable to external threats. The Italian Wars, which began in 1494 and lasted for several decades, involved France, Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, and other European powers competing for control over Italian territories. These conflicts caused widespread destruction, economic disruption, and loss of political autonomy for many Italian states. The sack of Rome in 1527 by imperial forces under Charles V marked a symbolic turning point, highlighting the vulnerability of Italian cities and undermining their cultural leadership. The rise of powerful centralized states in Northern Europe also contributed to the decline of Italy's dominance. Nations such as Spain, France, and England consolidated political authority and economic resources, enabling them to compete in areas that had once been led by Italian cities, including banking, trade, and cultural production. The shifting balance of power in Europe reduced the relative influence of Italian city-states. Economic changes further weakened the foundation of the Italian Renaissance. The discovery of new maritime trade routes around Africa to Asia and across the Atlantic to the Americas altered global commerce. The Mediterranean, once central to trade networks, became less important as Atlantic ports in Spain, Portugal, and Northern Europe gained prominence. Italian cities such as Venice and Genoa experienced a decline in their economic importance, which reduced the wealth available for cultural patronage and urban development. The decline of banking families such as the Medici and the changing nature of international finance also affected Italy's economic stability. Religious and social transformations contributed to the decline as well. The Protestant Reformation, which began in 1517, challenged the religious authority of the Catholic Church and led to religious conflicts across Europe. Although Italy remained predominantly Catholic, the Counter-Reformation, initiated by the Catholic Church in response to Protestant movements, shifted the cultural environment. The Church implemented stricter controls on artistic and intellectual expression, promoting religious orthodoxy and discouraging some forms of humanist inquiry. Censorship, the Index of Forbidden Books, and the Inquisition created an atmosphere less favorable to the open exploration of ideas that had characterized the Renaissance. The social and economic consequences of recurring plagues, including outbreaks of the bubonic plague, further destabilized Italian society. Population losses, labor shortages, and social unrest weakened urban centers, reduced economic productivity, and strained resources needed for public works, education, and cultural patronage. Artistic developments also contributed to the end of the Renaissance period. By the later 16th century, the styles and ideals of the High Renaissance had evolved into Mannerism, which emphasized complexity, artificiality, and stylistic experimentation over the balance, proportion, and naturalism associated with earlier Renaissance works. While Mannerism and subsequent artistic movements produced significant works, they reflected a departure from the principles that had defined the height of the Renaissance. The decline of the Italian Renaissance was thus not the result of a single event, but rather a gradual process influenced by political conflicts, economic shifts, religious changes, social challenges, and cultural evolution. Despite the decline, the achievements of the Italian Renaissance had a lasting impact on European history, laying the groundwork for scientific advancement, artistic traditions, and intellectual developments in later centuries. The decline marked the transition from the Renaissance to new historical periods, including the Baroque era and the rise of nation-states, as Europe continued to evolve in response to internal and external forces.